Welcome to Supernatural Japan, the podcast where we explore the mysterious, the haunted, and the chilling stories from the shadows of Japan's past and present. I'm your host, Kevin O'Shea, and in this episode, we're taking a deep dive into one of the darkest and most terrifying events in modern Japanese history, the 1995 Tokyo Sarin gas attack. This wasn't a ghost story or an urban legend. This was real. It was sudden, it was brutal, and it forever changed how Japan viewed domestic safety and extremism. On the morning of March 20th, 1995, during rush hour, members of the doomsday cult Aum Shinrikyo unleashed deadly sarin gas on the Tokyo subway system, killing 13 people, severely injuring dozens, and affecting thousands. It was the first large-scale chemical attack on civilians by a domestic group, not in wartime, but in peacetime, right in the heart of one of the world's safest cities. To help unpack this chilling case, I sat down with Brian Waters, a Japan-based university instructor with an understanding of the event. Brian breaks down how the attack was carried out, what sarin gas is and why it's so dangerous, and he gives us an in-depth look at the cult behind it all, Aum Shinrikyo, and its enigmatic, apocalyptic leader, Shoko Asahara. It's a story of belief turned fanatic, science twisted into horror, and a city forever marked by an invisible killer. This is not your typical supernatural tale, but in many ways, it's even more unsettling. Stay with us. Okay, folks, it is another episode of the Supernatural Japan podcast where I do have a guest. It's fantastic when this happens. Most of the time, it is just I sharing with you tales, spooky things, crime type things, the kind of darker side of Japan. And today, I've got someone to help me with that. Someone to help me a lot. I'm going to be learning with all of you folks. This is a kind of a true crime case, something that kind of is very famous / I guess infamous in the history of Japan. This evening, we're going to be talking about the sarin gas attacks in Tokyo. And with me, for the first time on the Supernatural Japan podcast, is Brian Waters. Brian, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Kevin, great to be with you. I always enjoy podcasting with you. So much fun. And I'm enjoying the Supernatural Japan podcast. It's really interesting. And a lot of them are really quick and you can just get in there and get out. But yeah, so I'm kind of happy that you're kind of expanding it a little bit into more true crime stuff. And I think this topic, I've presented on it a few times, just to lay people who don't know anything about it. And I think it's interesting, and it has a little bit of supernatural elements to it because of the cultish type of behavior, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So folks out there listening, Brian has been a guest on my previous podcast, the Just Japan podcast, and one I had for a while called the Just Asia podcast, many times to talk about a wide variety of topics. But the first time on the Supernatural Japan podcast. So Brian, I was wondering if you could just give the listeners a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you are, and kind of what you do.
Yes, of course. I'm from the United States. I'm from North Carolina originally. I was born and raised there. I'm half Japanese, which is why I always had an interest in Japan. And then when I was in university, I did study abroad. And then I went on the JET program after I graduated from university and got interested in forensic science. So I got a master's degree in forensic science, and then I worked at the Los Angeles coroner's office for almost 8 years as a criminalist or a forensic scientist. Mm-hmm. And then in 2011, I moved back to Japan with my wife who's Japanese and our kids, and I started working at the forensic medicine department at Fukuoka University, where I've been for the past 14 years. Oh my God, it's been 14 years.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Cool. Wow. 14 years back in Japan. And This is a topic that I remember very well when this happened. At the time, I was in university in Canada. And of course, this was global news. And, it was actually Brian who suggested this topic for the podcast. I thought this is fantastic. We are dipping our toes into true crime from time to time. And like you said, there was the definite cult element to this. So we're going to talk about the sarin gas attack. And I'm going to let Brian take the lead on this. Of course, there are a lot of you out there who may not be aware of this. This part of darker part of more infamous part of Japanese modern history. Brian, can you let us know or tell us a little bit about this attack, and then we'll kind of go on from there.
Certainly. So the basic information is on March 20th, 1995. It was a Monday, 7 a.m. rush hour. And we know Japanese subway rush hour is crazy people, tons of people. There was an attack, a terrorist attack, domestic terrorist attack on the Tokyo subway system. There were 5 coordinated attacks on 3 major Tokyo metro lines. If you're familiar with Tokyo, it was the Chiyoda line, the Hibiya line, and the Marunouchi line.
Okay.
And there were some specific areas targeted. There was Kasumi Gaseki Eki, which is near some government buildings, including the National Diet. Nagatacho, which is another political center close to the prime minister's residence. And Tsukiji, many people know Tsukiji for the fish market, but it's right around that same area.
Okay.
Those were the main areas that were targeted. And basically there were, the attack was performed by Shinrikyo cult members. This was a cult that was popular back it started in the 80s, and we'll get into that. But there were 5 different members that were assigned these different areas, and they all took out this attack in those different areas, in those different subway cars. And all were high-ranking members of the cult. The leader of the cult, who is Shoko Asahara, we'll talk about him in a minute, he was not physically present. He was kind of organizing and the leader of the cult in the attack, but he was not actually there. He didn't perpetrate the attack.
So he was kind of like, I guess in a way, almost like when you think of like the Manson family. Charles Manson wasn't one of the people who actually performed the killings, but it was the members of his group that did. And I think also too, if I'm not wrong, and you're going to probably maybe go a little bit into this, but Shoko Asahara was also blind, right? Or had some, yeah, I guess he wouldn't have been capable of doing this. Okay. You're gonna, I guess, you're gonna kind of go into this in a little bit, but this is called the sarin gas attack, and I guess we're gonna unpack all these different things. The first time I had ever heard of sarin gas was when this came out on the news. Now, mind you, I don't come from a chemistry background, but I guess I am familiar a little bit with at least loosely kind of, World War I history where gas attacks were first used in war, and you heard of chlorine gas and mustard gas. And during World War II, unfortunately, there were nerve agents used by the Nazis, and you hear about different things. But sarin is something that was new to me at the time. And it's not a term I ever really hear in any other capacity. It's just when it refers to this attack in Tokyo. So, how did they go about doing this? How do you attack crowded subways with a deadly gas?
Right. So let's talk about first how they did it, and then we'll talk about sarin, specifically.
Yeah, sure.
But basically, like I said, there were 5 guys. They were on 5 different train cars on these different lines, kind of spread out throughout the city, and each of the perpetrators, they carried this sarin, liquid sarin, in plastic bags that were wrapped in newspaper to kind of hide them.
Okay.
And then once they were on the trains, and these, like I said, this was rush hour, 7 a.m. These were packed trains. They basically, through the newspaper, on the ground, and then they punctured the plastic bags with sharpened
Okay.
umbrella tips, and that allowed the liquid to spread out. And we'll talk about this in a second, but sarin is a very volatile compound, and so it goes from a liquid to a gas very readily.
Okay.
And this was crowded train cars. If anyone has ever tried to take the subway in Tokyo, you know how many people just you know those famous YouTube videos of people like of the train staff pushing people
Pushing
into the
people in
already
because they're
full.
just so crowded. And it's not just the trains; like the platforms are absolutely packed and crowded.
Yeah,
It's a sea of humanity, essentially.
exactly. So that was the condition of the cars, and so they punctured them, and then they immediately left the cars. They ran, and after they punctured the bags, and then
Mhm.
each attacker had their own getaway driver. So they
Okay.
exited the station and they jumped in a waiting car and then took off. So they obviously, it wasn't like a suicide bombing or anything like that. They wanted to get away with it, right?
Mm. Mm.
So
Yeah.
basically, these people that were on these train cars, they started coughing. They couldn't breathe. They couldn't see. They started suffering from blurred vision and convulsions and
Mm.
respiratory distress, and many people died. The
Mm.
attack actually killed. Well, at first it was the report was 11 people, but two additional people had died a little bit later.
Okay.
So 13 people total, and then over 5,500 people. I mean, you have to imagine this is packed Tokyo rush hour, subway cars. Over
Mm.
5,500 people, including like first responders, people who were trying to help. They suffered from injuries and long-term neurological damage because
Mm.
of the effect of the sarin, and then of course psychological just damage,
Oh
just the
yeah.
trauma of going through something like that.
And from what I remember, the news clips I'd seen, and even just some documentaries I've seen about it in years past. I mean, the absolute panic and confusion was so intense because no one had any idea what was going on. It's not kind of like in a cartoon where you have clouds of green gas floating through the air, and everyone might have a clue of what's going on. People were just, from what I recall, like just falling down and collapsing sick and vomiting, and no one had any idea what was going on.
Exactly right. So let's talk a little bit about sarin
Okay.
because that'll help us kind of understand what's going on.
Hmm.
Basically, and you're right. Like I my undergraduate degree was in textile chemistry, so I
Okay.
was kind of familiar with chemistry, and but I had never heard of sarin until this event happened in 1995, and
Mm.
so and yeah, so basically, sarin is a toxic nerve agent. It's a synthetic compound, so which means it was developed in a lab
Hmm.
as a chemical weapon. I mean, it wasn't. It's entirely man-made, so it's not available in nature.
Okay.
You can contrast that with like biological weapons that people use as biological weapons. Like, for example, ricin or anthrax. Those are available in nature and have to be kind of like, you know, harvested and then concentrated before they can kind of be used.
Okay.
And originally, sarin was uh, well, the original story is that what it was invented by a German chemist in 1938. So this is right during World War II,
Hmm.
and originally it was supposed to be a pesticide to protect German crops. Now synthetic organophosphates are used for pesticides. You might know the names of some, like for example, glyphosate, which is kind of a popular organophosphate that's still used as a pesticide.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that was the story, but it's kind of fishy that it was right around the time of World War II that it was developed.
Yeah.
And but basically, it's a clear, colorless, and tasteless liquid. So it would like you said, there's no like green gas cloud or something like that that indicates that you should be, like that you're in danger or anything like
Mm,
that. It just, you breathe it in and it just starts affecting you. And it
mm,
basically, the reason that it's so volatile is it has a very low vapor pressure.
okay.
So it's not a low boiling point. It's just a low vapor pressure. So it goes from a liquid to a gas very readily.
Mm,
And so in these subway cars, it's hot. There's a lot of people, and it's a enclosed space.
yeah.
So if it was outdoors, it would just blow away in the wind. But when you have an enclosed space and it's warm, then
Mm,
it readily evaporates and gets into people, and then people just breathe it in.
mm.
And it basically works by disrupting the nervous system, and it leads to paralysis of your lungs, and your breathing apparatus just closes up your neck, and basically you die by asphyxiation.
Oh, okay.
And anyone who comes in contact with, just immediately your eyes start watering, you start coughing, and then people vomit. And
Mm.
you probably saw in those YouTube videos, there's like people just laying on their sides, just vomiting
Yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah. Lots of people vomiting,
that.
and like the first responders, and again that panic because again no one knows what's going on, and like you mentioned, it's odorless, it's scentless, and I mean we've both and maybe some of the listeners out there have possibly commuted in Japan in different large urban areas during rush hours, and I can remember at some points, like in Osaka, being on crowded trains, and it's a very uncomfortable experience to begin with. It's super packed, it's crowded, it's hot, especially in the wintertime. This happened in March. The heaters are probably still on. You know, I not to try to make light of things, but like I used to joke around about, like when you'd have like a salaryman fart on a train, or some bad smell. Often they don't smell good. That air isn't circulated well. You get the smell of BO from salarymen and maybe gas from salarymen who've maybe not been eating so well or drinking too much the night before. So I can only imagine this gas. Just no one would have known what hit them.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, it was. I mean, this was a designated terror event. I mean, this is what Asahara wanted to happen. He wanted to create panic and terror and death, and unlike biological weapons that a lot of times take a lot of time to actually affect the person, like they have to build up a large concentration in their body before it starts to show symptoms. The onset of sarin is like seconds, so as soon as you're exposed to it, you start you know your eyes start watering, you start coughing. These are what these nerve agents do. I mean, it is similar to like mustard gas and like VX and those
Okay.
things that you mentioned that were used during World War I and World War II.
Hmm.
And so this is just using sarin was just like a logical choice for wanting to kill a lot of people in a small enclosed space, and to basically just terrorize people, which is what the
Hmm.
purpose was.
Yeah, yeah. So now these, it was well organized, well orchestrated. These attackers, five attackers, quickly escaped. They punctured these packets just before I think they arrived in stations and they could exit. They had getaway drivers. How did they find out who did this? How did the Japanese officials, law enforcement officials catch these guys or find out who was behind it?
Right. That's a good question. So basically, nothing like this had ever happened in Japan, or really like with sarin in this respect, had ever happened in the world, really,
Mm,
up to this point. Sarin had not been used, in this way,
yeah.
ever recorded before. So, like the authorities, they didn't really know what they were dealing with. They just thought, it was something crazy. So the Japanese authorities launched a massive investigation. I mean, this was, of course, if you think, something like this could happen again, you definitely want to prevent it. You definitely want to catch the perpetrators. And they were able to basically, through the investigation and through eyewitness accounts and all this kind of stuff, they were able to find and eventually arrest over 200 members of this Aum Shinrikyo cult, including the leader, Shoko Asahara.
Mm.
And they found the 5 men who carry out the Sarin release. They got their getaway drivers, and all were identified and prosecuted.
Okay. Now, these, I was just kind of refreshing myself last night, knowing that we were going to be having this conversation this evening, and I was watching some kind of news clips about this and some videos by Vice and different other organizations. So a lot of these members of the cult who were captured, I know you're going to explain a little bit more, go into a little bit more depth about the cult itself, but a lot of these, the perpetrators were executed. Is that correct?
That's right. So basically, after they were arrested, many of them, especially the ones who were like actually involved in the attack, there were 13 senior members of the cult, including Asahara, who were actually sentenced to death.
Mm-hmm.
And the death penalty still exists in Japan even to this day. And so you would think, well, this had to have been a long time ago, but actually the executions weren't carried out until 2018. This was after all of their, appeals had, been rejected and all that kind of stuff. So Asahara, the leader, and 6 others were hanged on July 6, 2018. And then the remaining 6 were hanged on July 26, 2018. So all in 2018, these 13 guys were sentenced to death.
Mm.
And there still remains some people who were involved in the attack, kind of on the surface, like other lower ranking members that may still be imprisoned or were imprisoned and released and stuff like that.
Mm. So I guess the question that we're wondering is, why the heck did this cult? I guess why the heck did this happen? What was the reason for them doing this? You don't normally think of. I guess we as I guess maybe the modern perspective are thinking of when we have terrorist acts. There's often countries that are kind of in a state of war. You think of the troubles in Northern Ireland and with the UK back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and you think of the things that led to the Iraq War and all of this with 9/11, and you think of countries that were kind of bitter countries or like groups of people from different countries in kind of a bitter turmoil. And I think we were all surprised when we found out, mind you, it was 1995 that an attack had happened in Japan, but also it was a homegrown attack.
That's right. Yeah. So domestic terrorism, and so let's kind of pivot and talk about the cult itself. Yeah. So this was the name of this group was Aum Shinrikyo. It was founded in 1984, and it was first called Aum Shinsen no Kai, and officially it was renamed Aum Shinrikyo in 1987. The meaning is Aum is a sacred Hindu symbol, and then Shinrikyo means supreme truth. Mm-hmm. So it was a cult. It was they believed that the world was kind of heading toward Armageddon. They thought there was going to be a nuclear holocaust, and that everyone was going to die. So, and then Asahara told its followers that only the Aum members would survive this Armageddon and be spiritually elevated. And he claimed to be Christ. He claimed to be the Lamb of God, and he claimed to be the only enlightened one since the Buddha.
Okay.
Yeah, and let's talk about this guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, who is this guy? Because when you see videos of him or pictures of him, you kind of scratch your head and say, I don't know, how did this guy do what he did and get all these people? I guess cult leaders all have clearly some type of charisma to have the success that they do. They're salesmen somehow. So yeah, tell us a little bit about Shoko Asahara.
Right. So just like you said, like cult leaders, they're an interesting bunch because some of them, just you can tell they're very charismatic or they're good looking or whatever, but some of them aren't. And this
Yeah, I
guy
was
would
gonna say, like,
definitely,
I've recently listened to some documentaries. There's a podcast I listened to called "The History of the '90s," and they did a couple of episodes about the siege at Waco. And when you think of like David Koresh and the Branch Davidians, when you look at David Koresh, he was a pretty good-looking guy, and he
right,
was very charismatic, and although there's that's it's a complex thing, but like you see him and you're like, oh, maybe I don't get it in a way, but you know what I mean, like he's a
right.
charismatic kind of handsome man, and then some aren't.
Exactly. So if you Google Shoko Asahara, you'll see kind of a strange looking guy with a scraggly beard and mustache and long hair, and he's kind of pudgy. And you're like, how could this guy, how could people follow this guy? But I guess that's not looks aren't everything in terms of being charismatic or what have you. So Shoko Asahara was born March 2nd, 1955 in Kumamoto Prefecture, Japan.
Mm.
So right down here in Kyushu, and his birth name was Matsumoto Chizuo Matsumoto. And if you look at the pictures of him, you can see he's often like has his eyes closed or is kind of looking off to the side or whatever, and that's because he was partially blind when he was born, and so he attended a school for the blind where he learned massage and yoga and acupuncture and Chinese medicine
Mhm.
and all these things, which that still is done today in Japan. A lot of these alternative schools and stuff. I used to teach English at one here in Fukuoka, actually. But schools for the blind or for the deaf, and they learn these kind of non-traditional, vocations that that only they could, uh, be be good at. But basically, so he did this. He actually started a business, and he was convicted of fraud in 1982 for selling
Okay.
fake remedies.
A
So
true,
obviously,
literally a snake oil. Well, yeah, like figuratively, I suppose, but like a snake oil salesman.
exactly, and so we see he had these dishonest and kind of and weird tendencies right from the beginning, but I guess he figured that he would have more influence if he had like some kind of spiritual, aura about him. So he joined a already established religion called Agonshu, and then he splintered off and founded his own group,
Okay.
and he gained followers through just for teaching yoga and meditation. And then he would have these like sermons where he talked about the apocalypse and the coming nuclear apocalypse and that kind of thing. And
Mm.
so yeah, I guess it was, you see these videos and, around World War II of Hitler like talking to thralls of people. And again, Hitler's another leader who not not really a good looking guy. And he's like just yelling and screaming at the top of his lungs. He doesn't look charismatic, but obviously it's a little bit more about that. So anyway, Shoko got this huge following, all these followers, and he started getting not only followers, but these people were, giving him money, and he was able to, like, sell these remedies and stuff, and they amassed like a huge amount of money, this crazy amount of money with so many followers.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I saw, in a video I watched last night was they talked about how to be part of that cult, you had to basically give them everything, and they were able to just accrue this massive wealth. But then they also kind of like a lot of organized crime syndicates in many ways. Sometimes they had legitimate companies. Like I saw that they had a computer company where they sold like budget computers. You could buy like the cheapest, really cheap PCs all around Japan. And this company, that company made a fortune, which all went back into the cult.
Right. Everything was serving the cult. And, all these, like, whatever, quote unquote, legitimate businesses. But yeah, but it was all to generate money for the cult. And they even had like political ambitions. And
Mm.
during this one like election, the Alm members 25 all members went for positions in Japan's parliament. This was in 1990,
Okay.
and all of them lost. And you can go on YouTube and you can look at, like, you know how the in Japan. I mean, if you're not familiar with Japan, but politicians will they'll get on these buses and they'll go into the city areas and they'll stand on the top of the buses or the vans, and they'll, have a microphone and speak to the crowds. And you
Yeah.
can see these all members. They're all dressed in white and robes and everything, and singing and all that kind of stuff. And so I guess he thought he had more, like, power over, the general population than he actually did.
Hmm.
And all of these all members lost their elections. And that really, like, a lot of experts say that that was kind of the turning point where Asahara, he he felt like, okay, you're not going to listen to me, then I'm going to do damage to you. And he really, started turning to more violence
Hmm.
and more radical, like, ways of doing things. Right.
Yeah, I'd heard
Yes.
that. I'd heard that. Like some of the things I'd seen over the years is that, for example, well, people who kind of got in the way, or like there was like one lawyer or someone who was trying to like dig into things, and the members of Aum Shinrikyo murdered him and his family, like wife and young children and stuff. Like they literally took people out who got in their way.
That's right. That's true. And, like, it interesting about the members of Aum Shinrikyo, because I mean there were a lot of members. I mean, at its peak, the membership in Japan, just in Japan, was about 10,000 people, which is not a small amount.
Mm.
And basically it was, I mean, the way it was able to kind of do this was, like, I mean, they're like, its members, maybe Asahara himself, they were really smart. They did it kind of in a systematic way.
Yeah.
They used the already established laws of, that protects religious organizations in Japan,
Mhm.
and they basically were able to kind of get tax exemptions and legal
Mm.
protections, and that just gave them a lot of freedom to operate and expand. And even people that were going, like, hey, what's going on, this is kind of weird, what are you doing? Or maybe family members of their loved ones who had joined this cult, they were like, they just couldn't do anything against them. They couldn't get the police to investigate them or anything. That's why they were able to kind of do something on this huge scale, because they had protections, and they kind of moved in the shadows and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
And the interesting thing about a lot of the members that were recruited to be, like, higher ups in this cult were, like, really elite university students, like young professionals, really smart, like scientists, engineers, medical professionals, and also like government officials. And not only that, but like gangsters, like Yakuza. There were some Yakuza members that were among the one among some of the top members of the Aum Shinrikyo. And that's where the kind of, the coercion of lawyers or whatever comes into play.
Wow. Yeah. No, I'd heard that a lot of they had a lot of very intelligent members of the cult and a lot of scientists, and I know that again from things I've seen over the years that they ran their own labs where they were. I mean, I saw one thing where they tried to get their hands or they got their hands on some like Kalashnikovs, AK-47 rifles from the Russia, and were trying to like set up a factory to build their own, and they were trying to build chemical weapons. Like I guess they had success with that, right? But
Exactly. Yeah.
they were doing a lot of extremely nefarious stuff on a huge scale. Like they had these massive compounds out in the middle of nowhere too. That God knows what they were doing there. Well, I guess we do know what they were doing there. They were doing a lot of bad stuff.
Yeah, and that goes to show how much money they were raising, because they were able to, build these huge compounds where they were doing all this chemical weapons testing. And you're right about the AK-47. The crazy thing about that is, at the peak of Alm's, like, power, they had like 40 or 50,000 members, and most of those members were in Russia. which is
Mm.
crazy. It's like after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the fall of communism in Russia, I guess its people were kind of searching for something, right? And
Mm.
maybe, Asahara kind of realized that, and he pounced on him. He was like, hey, if you're feeling bad about, your station in life, come join us, because he basically promised spiritual enlightenment, and salvation, like a lot of cults do. It's like, and people want to be a part of something, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
kind of lost and you're floating around, and in the 1980s in Japan, it was a really good time. I mean, like, financially, Japan was on the top of the world, but I guess there are still a lot of people who are kind of left out in the lurch even when things are going well. And he kind of pounced on them. He offered them like a sense of purpose, a sense of community.
Mm.
And I think a lot of really, really smart people, like really, really intelligent people, especially in the sciences, they're kind of, maybe a lot of them are kind of socially awkward, and maybe they can't make friends or something like that. And like he targeted those people and like reached out and said, listen, you can be a part of something big here.
Mm.
And I guess he used that as kind of, the way to kind of get them in.
Yeah, I just kind of giggle to myself because I've definitely encountered quite a few people over the years who are in the sciences and whatnot, and maybe sometimes socially awkward as a way to describe things. When you're, but yeah, I mean that's one of the things. I mean, cult leaders is obviously, especially successful ones. They're savvy. They know what they're doing. They know who to try to envelop and how to get them and how to sell things and. It does tend to be those people who are looking for something, people who feel some kind of emptiness in their lives, and so yeah, you there was something you now that I had not heard of before. Actually, you'd sent some kind of like notes to me, and maybe I'm jumping around a little bit here, but something happened in Matsumoto with sarin gas.
That's right.
And
It's
this is something I had no idea about. I've never heard of this until now.
right. So this is kind of an interesting little twist to the story. Prior to the Tokyo attacks,
Hmm.
there was a sarin attack in Matsumoto, Nagano Prefecture, and it's just ironic that his original name is Matsumoto, and then he did this attack in Matsumoto
Mm.
in Nagano Prefecture. But basically, this was prior to the sarin attack, which was in March of 1995. This was in June of
Was this like a kind of
1994.
a test run or something?
It kind of was a test run, but it was also specifically targeting people. So
Okay.
there was like we had mentioned, and like you had mentioned, like there are people who were kind of like, they were like, this cult, these guys aren't like, they're not on the up and up. So of course they were being investigated, they were being sued, all this kind of stuff. Like, people were giving, like you said, people were giving their whole like life savings to this group, and the family members would be like, what the heck's going on here? Something's up with these people. So they were being investigated, and there was actually someone had taken them to court over some of this stuff. So there were these judges who were in charge of this court case, and they didn't see things, they didn't decide things in Alm's favor, and so the Alm cult, they targeted these three judges, and it just so happened that these three judges were living together in like a dormitory that
Okay.
was in this which was in Matsumoto in Nagano, and so they basically took a big refrigerated truck, and they just parked it right outside of this apartment complex, and then they released the sarin gas, and so that it wafted and flowed towards the apartment complex. Now they didn't successfully assassinate the three judges. These three judges lived, but there were 8 people who died, and over people became very sick and
Oh.
had to be hospitalized and things like that.
Mm.
Now, the thing is, like, the police had never seen anything like this, and there was no indication of who would be behind why someone would do this, why there would be such an attack. So they did not suspect the Aum Shinrikyo cult at all. This was like, like I said, like a almost a year, before the Tokyo subway attack. And so this kind of went as a unsolved case. And actually, the police, they kind of honed in on this guy who lived in the area,
Mhm.
who was totally like innocent. The only thing he was guilty of was he kind of complained about some of the people who lived in that apartment complex, like they were loud or something. He complained a few times to the police department, but he didn't do it. But he was arrested, and like his life was basically ruined. But
Mm.
after the Tokyo Sarin attack and through the investigation, they finally realized, okay, they used the same, chemical
They
weapon
put the
on
pieces
this.
together after that. It was like, oh, wait a second. That's really similar to what just happened here in Tokyo. Ah, the same kind
Exactly.
of MO.
So yeah, so I guess the sentencing after the Tokyo subway attacks included probably this attack on Matsumoto as well,
Wow.
which is why they were well, they probably would have been put to death even if they were just basing it on the Tokyo attack. But still, it's crazy that it's crazy that this was such a new and like unheard of thing
Mm.
that it took this kind of chemical being used twice in two different incidents for them to kind of finally put it together.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah,
wow.
so I guess it's just an insane story any way
Yeah.
you look at it, and kind of a cautionary tale
Yeah.
about cults and about keeping your eyes open and
Yeah. So what about today in 2025? Is Aum Shinrikyo still a thing? If their leader was executed back in 2018, and a lot of the leaders, and I know he was in prison since 1995, is there still anything left of this cult in Japan?
You would think not, because of the crazy bad, reputation it would have, but it does persist. It's changed its name. It's no longer called Aum Shinrikyo,
Hmm.
and they branched into a couple of different several factions. The major ones are called Aleph, and the other one is Hikari no Wa, which means Circle of Rainbow Light.
Yeah,
The base,
that's an interesting one. The Circle of Rainbow Light. Talk about trying to rebrand.
yeah, exactly. But these factions, they uh it's funny because I would think that if you were going to try to start or continue this cult, that you would completely disavow you know Asahara and
Yeah, yeah,
everything that he did.
yeah.
And they do in a way, but it's not as strong as you would think.
Mm.
They still, he's basically the creator of this movement,
Hmm.
and they still, see him as that. And of course, they're all about peace and love and all this kind of stuff and
Yeah.
community. But if you go on their web pages, which I did kind of in preparation of this, but it's amazing, and it still has hundreds of members.
Mm.
And um, but one thing's for sure is that these groups are very, very closely surveilled by law enforcement, even to this day. And so, if they were if they were suddenly able to kind of amass a huge, fortune, or start stockpiling chemicals or
Yeah.
something like that, they certainly would be found out very quickly.
Yeah, wow. So, folks out there listening, all you have to do, if this is like a new case for you, you haven't heard of the Tokyo sarin gas attacks, just literally search on YouTube, and there is just so much stuff from just kind of original news footage and news stories, a lot of Japanese, like American, and then just there's a lot of documentaries that have been made on the topic over the years about the cult itself, about Shoko Asahara, about the attack. There's it's quite a rabbit hole.
Yes, and it's pretty crazy. It's pretty unbelievable because Kevin, you lived in Japan for a long time.
Yeah,
How many years total did you live in
I
Japan?
was there
Like
about
10 years or
10
something?
years.
Yeah, so you lived in Japan a long time. I've lived in Japan a long time. There are probably people who are listening who have lived or who live in Japan
Yeah, yeah,
and have lived in Japan. And you would never think that the Japanese people, as polite and as conscientious and as logical as they are,
mm.
would ever, get sucked in to such a kind of crazed cult like group. But it just goes to show you that there's no explanation for it. Like humans, they can be fooled, they can be brainwashed,
Yeah.
and they can be made to carry out these heinous acts, even if they're just regular seeming people or intelligent people who are smart and know a lot about chemistry and biology. It's kind of humbling to think that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of those things that when you do dive down the rabbit hole of looking into cults and stuff over the years, it's not often gullible, daft people. They're often people who are very intelligent, who have a lot to offer, and it's just like, wow, it's pretty remarkable. Yeah, and one of the biggest crimes ever committed in Japan in modern Japanese history, and definitely something very dark and scary. I think probably I can't imagine for how long people in Tokyo and commuters all around Japan were probably terrified to even think about commuting and going into the train stations, which is such a necessary part of life in Japan. That's how people get around in the big cities. That must have been another very terrifying factor.
Yeah, you think about how disruptive the coronavirus was back in 2020,
Yeah.
and this had to have been or like 9/11, right?
Yeah.
The terrorist attacks in New York, and how that disrupted people's life. I remember we're still taking our shoes off and stuff at the airport sometimes.
Yeah, true.
And just, yeah, so something like this to come completely out of left field, and like you said, it wasn't like war. It wasn't like crazy Islamic terrorists or anything like that. These were just crazy cultists who
Mm.
basically they it's said that Asahara wanted to bring about the end of the world. He wanted to bring about this. He wanted to start this kind of world war that was going to put everyone into the end of days, except for their little group.
Yeah, which is
And
what
so,
so many cult leaders promise that the end of days is coming, and all you guys, you're going to be okay, but everyone else, no. And if you give me all your money, you'll especially be okay.
that's right. And just true to form, like, do you think Asahara really believed the stuff he was selling? And I got to think, like, if he was so devout and he believed he was Christ and all that kind of stuff. But the stories are that, yeah, he was just like any cult leader. Like, he had sex with a lot of the different members, and he manipulated them and set them against each other and all this kind of stuff. So it's just like Koresh and all of these guys. They just, they're out for power, and that's
Yep.
influence.
And to control people and all those dark, dark things. Well, Brian, I don't want to keep you much longer. We're going to maybe wrap things up here with this very interesting episode of the podcast. a very infamous crime, a large-scale crime in Japan in 1995 that I kind of had forgotten about until you had mentioned it to me. And it's like, wow, this is a fascinating one. So I want to thank you, Brian, for coming on the podcast and sharing all your knowledge with us. If people want to find you online and see what you're up to, where can they find you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I'm at My2Yen in all the places: Blue Sky, Threads, Twitter. I'm still on Twitter, and so yeah. So feel free to send me a message or whatever.
Cool. I'll put links in the show notes, folks. So again, I know that you're pretty active on Blue Sky and Twitter. I'm still on X, Twitter a bit. Part of me definitely does not want to be. A big part of me doesn't want to be. But there are still so many great people over there, kind of in the Japanese community and stuff. The Japan vlogosphere, or just content creators and cool people who haven't abandoned that space yet. So I kind of still hang in there just because I don't want to lose contact with those cool people. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's not perfect, but I still think it has the most people there. And like
Yeah.
I'll often go there if I want to find like news about stuff that just happened, like, and just go in there and like do a quick search for it, and
Yeah,
tons of stuff
I have to
pops
admit,
up.
I've really kind of moved more over to Blue Sky. That's where I'm most active. I kind of tend to just kind of enjoy that vibe over there. But I dabble everywhere. The one thing I don't get yet is I get no love is over on Threads. But I know Japanese people are really into Threads. That's a big thing in Japan.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of they're really pushing it over there at Instagram and Facebook, but
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Like,
So if you're in that, if you're in that world, like, I think it makes a lot of sense. But
yeah.
yeah,
Interesting. Okay, well, Brian, thank you so much for coming on the Supernatural Japan podcast, and I really appreciate it.
you're welcome, and I look forward to being back on Just Japan sometime
Oh
soon.
yeah, we'll
And
get you there too. We'll
yeah,
definitely.
all right, man.
Well, that was chilling indeed. A dark day in Tokyo history. I want to thank Brian for taking the time to come on Supernatural Japan. You can find him on social media at My2Yen. Please go and follow him. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and leave an amazing review wherever you listen to us. Now you can follow us on social media and send your own spooky tales to supernaturaljapan@gmail.com. You can always support this podcast, of course, and support the content that I create by buying me a coffee. That's right, buymeacoffee.com/BusanKevin. The link will be in the show notes, and anything that you donate will go directly to the production of Supernatural Japan. You can follow us on social media on Instagram for lots of photos of this and every other episode we've talked about at Supernatural Japan. Follow me on X and Blue Sky at Mad for Maple. And of course, we have a Facebook page if you're into that thing. Now, until next time, be safe and always make sure you steer clear of crazy cult leaders.